My mantle is empty. It hasn't been empty since Christmas, but it's almost Valentine's Day. Here's a little sneak peek of what I'm making. I'm going to use this Dollar Tree wood, and it has this little bit of resin in it. That's something to watch out for. So I'm just going to flip it over and use the other side. I made a few extra air dry clay squares when I made another project, and if you'd like to see how I made those, I'll link the video below. But I thought the air dry clay would be a nice bit of texture for this project, and this is the paper that I'm using. And specifically, I'm using this Bible verse portion of that paper, and I'm going to be painting a white stripe down the side of this wood. And because this box from the Dollar Tree happened to be the exact right width, I'm going to use that to mark off my lines. And then what I'm going to do is use some blue painter's tape to mark off where I need to paint. Once I got started on this, I realized that I should have painted the entire piece of wood first with my watered down paint that I'm using as a stain, but this worked out fine in the end. So I'm just marking off, it's just a little shy of 2 inches. Mark that off with the tape, and now I'm just going to paint that in with white paint. And then once the paint is dry, I'm just removing the painter's tape so that I'll have a nice crisp white line. Now, if there's any part of the tape that takes off the paint, or if there's any missing bits of paint, I can just go over it with the paintbrush just to touch it up. So now I'm just masking off the white area so that I can just water down some brown paint and then paint it on sort of like a faux stain. But what I should have done, like I said, is done this first and let that dry and then paint the white strip. But you live and you learn. And I decided to just do a little test first just to see how the stain would look. And so I'm just going with the grain, and I'm just putting down some watered down paint. And I'm not sure why I chose to use a tissue to wipe off the excess paint, but I did. And it would have been better to use a cloth because clearly the tissue is not strong and could possibly leave, little bits on the wood. So if I did it again, I would definitely use a cloth. So when I took off the tape, there were a few little spots where some of that brown paint went through. So I'll just touch that up with some paint at the end, like I mentioned before. This time around, for the other side of the white stripe, I decided to just freehand it with the watered down paint, and that actually worked out even better. Now the tile, that air dry clay tile, is actually going to be going on top of this area that I'm painting here. So I just wanted to still get it to be the right color so that it would be uniform. Now once my little brown paint wash gets dry, I'm going to decoupage the white stripe with the Bible verse. Now, the thing is, I'm not quite sure how it happened, but some brown paint got on the paper that has the Bible verse on it, as well as a little bit of white paint. And I'm not sure why I chose to do it, but I sort of dunked it in some water trying to get some of that brown off. I didn't film that part, but I was going to reprint it. But then I said, you know what? If I had purchased this and I only had one, I wouldn't be able to reprint it. So I figured I would just roll with it and use the wet rice paper. So once I sort of softened up the edges by ripping away the excess paper, then I applied the glue to that white stripe so that then I could apply this paper. And because it's pretty much soaked, it makes it pretty easy to rip away the excess paper. When I put this watered down paint on for the quote unquote test, I should have tested it on the back. So I'm not quite sure why I would put it on the front. And also it's always important to go with the grain of the wood when you're putting on a stain. Rice paper in and of itself is not bright white. It's a bit of an off-white. So I think what I'm going to do in the future is look for a paint that better matches rice paper because it's not really a bright white, and I think it'll look nicer if I actually find a white that's a little darker. I could add in a little bit of paint, but if I do find the right shade of white, then I want to be able to share it with you all so that you know like the best white to use with my rice paper. Now for the air dry clay, what I'm using is this part of this hummingbird paper. And in order to cut out the hummingbird, I'm just putting down a little bit of water and then ripping away at the excess paper. I love hummingbirds and I really look forward to seeing them every year. If you are a bird watcher, like me, I live in Georgia and usually the hummingbirds, they show back up in the spring, I think sometime around March. I have a hummingbird feeder that I keep on my back deck. And then sometime, I think around October is when you start to see like the last one, and then you don't see them again until spring. But they are so fun to watch. So now I'm just positioning the paper on my air dry clay. And once I get it in the right spot, I put down a bit of my decoupage glue. And then once I get enough glue down, I'm just going to smooth it in place. Here I'm using my finger, but usually I just use a little bit of plastic to smooth down the paper, just to make sure that my fingers don't, rip the paper or cause any smudges or smears. So now that I've flipped it up on the other end, I'm just applying a little bit more glue to the base, and then there I am with the plastic. And I'm just going to smooth that down. And I don't really feel the need sometimes to use a file or scissors to cut off the excess. Sometimes I just wrap it around the edge depending on the design. Now typically I wait until the glue underneath the paper is dry, but sometimes I get impatient and I go ahead and use my sealant over top of the rice paper before the base coat is dry. Whatever works for you. So now I'm going back over to the other side, and I'm going to use the hearts from that particular paper for the top and bottom of this stripe of white. And I'm just cutting off the edge so that it will, align with the white stripe, and just roughing up the top a bit so that it blends in with the bottom of the Bible verse. I'm just putting down some glue. And then I'll smooth down the rice paper. And what I found out is that I should have cut off just a little more white there on the right hand side. What I'll do is just cut that off. That way I can use those hearts later on in this project or on another project. And here I'm just picking away at some of the rice paper, which I should have taken off before I put it down. But once I put it down, I realized there was some excess, so I'm just taking away some of that extra paper. And that's that little bit of extra that I should have cut off. So I'm just trying to manipulate it a bit with my nail just to make that line straight. And now I'm getting really picky and using my tweezers to pluck away at some of the paper. But if I had cut enough away in the beginning, then I wouldn't have to do this. And even if I left it alone, I don't think anyone would notice. So now I'm just cutting out some more hearts using some water, and then I'll use those hearts on the other side of that stripe where the Bible verse is. I thought that the Bible verse and these hearts went well together because of the theme of love. And we're coming up on Valentine's Day, so I thought it would be a great project for this rice paper. Now, since I am putting this against a straight edge, that's why I cut the straight edge instead of just ripping away at the paper. And I'm just positioning that. And then I'll cut away at the right side edge of this part of the rice paper so that it can fit up against that white painted edge where the Bible verse is. This time I'm making sure that I cut away enough of the paper. And I'm just leaving enough. I'm leaving enough of the heart on the bottom. I'm not going to cut that off so that I can just wrap it around the back side of the wood. I think that the true definition of decoupage is to actually use cut pieces of paper, in a project. I tend to use whole pieces, like where there's a complete image, but I think the artful part is when you really do piece the papers together that you've ripped or cut to create your image, your art. I use water to cut out the paper because the water helps to break down the fibers, so that makes it easier to rip. If I were to just try to rip it with my fingers without the water, then it might not be accurate when I rip the paper. So I love the way the white stripe turned out on the left. And so now it's time to finish up the hummingbird on the air dry clay on the right. I thought it looked pretty just as it was, but I felt like it needed a little more. So I usually do test prints of my papers, so I had a little bit of extra pink flowers. But if you were to make this and you didn't have the extra paper, you could use whatever paper or embellishment you would want to use for the corners. Like if you had some pink stones or some glitter or even some ribbon, if you felt the need. But of course, for a project like this, you don't have to use my rice paper. You could use any paper that you want. Now I'm going to do the same thing where I'm just going to cut out bits and pieces of this flower so that I can use it as a bit of a frame for my air dry clay portion of this project. And while I am cutting this out of another rice paper, I will hang on to the excess, like the Bible verse, because I can use that in another project. Because this was a bit of a process, I just decided to speed up the video just a little bit, but I think you get the gist of what I'm doing here. I'm just using the water to piece the image apart where the flower is and just applying it to my air dry clay project here so that I can just create a bit of a frame. Well, I really like the way the hummingbird came out with the framing of the flowers and everything. And now it's time to just use a little hot glue to adhere the air dry clay to the wood. And then I'll put it up on my mantle. And what I'm going to do is use some flowers that I believe I got at the Dollar Tree, and a little candle that I know I got that at the Dollar Tree, just to stage the project on my mantle. And so let me know what you think. I think the colors do look really nice together. This is great decor for Valentine's Day. Just lots of love. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't joined my Facebook group, be sure to join. There's a link below. And if you have any questions, you can leave those below as well. Thanks for watching.